Hi, good afternoon, and thank you for everyone joining this legal session. I always wonder who in the people in the audience are going to want to hear about the lighter side of impact investing in Israel. My name is Janet Pachima. I'm from Herzog Fox Ne'eman, a law firm in Israel. We do all sorts of commercial work. We have about 400 lawyers, but besides doing mergers and acquisitions, I also run our impact investment practice area, and that's what I want to focus on with you here today. So the first question we always say is really, well, what is impact investment? And this conference has been terrific to look at a broad range of issues that come up and spaces and different things that we're doing, but I want to go back a second first and look at a definition. Now, if any of you were listening to Fred Castro just an hour or so ago, he was talking a lot about love in action and helping people to become better. And I really do. I think that's lovely. We're going to take it on a little more of a formal way and look at the definition that we have from GIN, the Global Impact Investing Network. And they talk about investments made into companies, organizations, and funds with the intention to generate social environmental impact alongside a financial return. That's like our triple bottom line, and that's our classic impact investment. Now, you hear about different fields that this could be relevant to, and there are just so many. So if you look on the screen, we're just running through a whole bunch of fields that matter, like education, economic development, microfinance, accessible health. There's a lot of issues of accessibility, clean energy, renewable energy. And you can see as we go through these, how many of these jive with the sustainable development goals of the UN, and they just naturally form together there. So what about Israel, and why Israel? And why are we talking about Israel so much when we talk about impact investment? Well, what's really interesting is that in Israel, high tech began in agriculture, which many people might not realize. And you might not think about that when you think about today's high tech society, when you think computing and computers and Waze and all these other companies that are associated today with Israel. But what happened is there were pioneers that came, but they found this land was bad. It was infertile. There was no water. They couldn't grow anything. The soil was bad. So necessity of all creation is going to be the necessity of adaptation. So they started to innovate and turning to technology. And here we are with the first technology starting in agriculture. And it's interesting, back in 1965 is when Netafim was founded. Many of you have heard of Netafim all over the world because it was really the leader, the creator of drip irrigation, which is now used in many, many parts of the world and is so important to handle water deficient areas. So that's where our Startup Nation came from, the Startup Nation in the technology. For those of you who've read the book Startup Nation, which gave us a brand to this phenomenon, then you can see exactly that need that we had for innovation. So let's go to the legal side for a second. And the real question is, what is your mission? What is your mission, and can you give a mission statement? How do we know? This is also true for an investor, certainly true for a company that are operating in any of the fields we've been talking about. What's the social problem you're trying to fix? What are you actually going to do to fix it? How is that going to help the problem that you have? And then what are you going to do to measure it? And will your legal documentation reflect all of these things to give you your mission? Now, we would say that to be a successful business, because impact investing, the idea is to be profitable and good for people and planet, first you have to be a successful business. That's going to be the core. There are a lot of obvious things that you're going to have to follow to make the company profitable, which is beyond the social and economic and environmental return. I mean, it's going to focus on the economic return, the profits of the company, and not just the environmental and social, to get this all together and have this be a sustainable business. Because as we say, you're not going to get a discount on your tax bill just because you're doing something good. That's not going to be enough. So let's look at some legal things that are important. Now, I'm sure you're going to think, well, this is true for any business. Yes, it is. For any business, is there intellectual property? I've heard a lot of people say, oh, we're not a tech company. We don't have intellectual property. You'd say, really? You don't have a logo? You don't have a brand? You don't have any designs that maybe you also have to think about whether you're protecting them? For any company, you got to make sure that the rights to the intellectual property are where they should be. I mean, you want to make sure that they're actually in the right place when you're talking to a company, that the rights are all there. Let's say there aren't founders who worked on something a long time ago, but they never managed to move it over into the company the way they were supposed to. Another thing that's important is what structure are you using? Are you a partnership? Are you a profit, a for-profit, a nonprofit? What structure is going to work for you the best? And then there's a lot of things that come up in tax considerations. We don't have a social investment tax relief or anything like that. You're not going to get special treatment because you're doing good things. But for people that invested in companies, for foreigners that have invested in companies since 2009, there is generally a full exemption on capital gains tax. That's incredibly important. And for venture capital funds, even if they're managed in Israel, they're able to get a ruling, usually if most of their investors are foreigners. There are a few exceptions here we don't have to get into, but it's important to understand how useful that is. The country also has a lot of government grants. Most well known is the Israel Innovation Authority, what used to be known as the Office of the Chief Scientist. Very good for helping research and development. They have a big emphasis now on research and development that can be applicable for the world's challenges, including in developing countries. So that's a good source of some funding, with a lot of strings attached, though, to be careful. And we also have some special tax regimes for companies that are in the tech area or in the periphery of the company, and they're entitled to some special tax benefits as well. You certainly don't have to worry about taking your money out after, which is important. There's no restriction on repatriation of your investment. So it's extremely easy place to work. Employment, another thing that you always have to be aware of. What are you offering to your employees? Are you complying with all legal restrictions that there are, all benefits? We have an extremely employee-friendly court system, so it's important that you get that right. Many people are very quick to give out options to employees. This is subject to make it tax beneficial to a very strict regime. It must be done properly. If you have a foot fault, a small error, you may not be entitled, your employees may not be entitled to the tax special treatment that they think they're going to have. So that's certainly important. And there are also regulated industries that you may have to worry about: environmental, hazardous materials, communications licenses, like any place. So please be aware of all those things. In your business, there may be other things that are very important to you. Now, when you're working with an investor, one of the problems with a newer company in this field is, what is my company worth? What's the valuation? There are ways not to rush into a valuation. One of the ways doing that is using convertible loans, where you say, I'm just going to take money now as a loan. Later on, we'll figure out the valuation, and then we'll give you a discount. The problem is the tax consequences of that are a bit unknown. The tax authorities tend to be difficult. They think the interest on those loans need to be taxed, meaning withholding tax will apply, which is difficult because the company wants to just take the interest and convert it also into shares. And that doesn't work, because then how do you pay withholding tax? And even the discount on the conversion, the tax authorities can take the stance that that is also a taxable event and there needs to be withholding. So it can be a bit complicated. Safes are become much more popular in Israel, because a safe is you're sort of just paying in advance, where you don't know the valuation, but you've just made the payment for equity already. And that makes it easier on the tax side. At the same time, you don't have to have your valuation set now. So it's important when an investor is working with a company and vice versa, that everyone stays very true to their cause. Now, there are some new fancy funding methods, but they can also have some drawbacks that you have to be aware of. For example, we heard during the summit in the beginning about recoverable grants. The problem with recoverable grants for the, let's say, the philanthropy or for the giving out the grants, they lose the benefit of having an evergreen source of funding, because if some grants don't have to be paid back in certain circumstances, now the entity giving the grants has to keep going on funding, not only to grow, but even to stay where they are today. So that can be difficult for the organization making recoverable grants because it needs to just keep fundraising on an even higher accelerated pace if it wants to grow at all. Milestones or success installments were also discussed, meaning an investor is going to give a certain amount of money. If the company can make a certain milestone, terrific, then they get more money. But that means that if they're close but don't quite make it, they can be punished for not being able to achieve all their objectives, and that make it harder for them to ever achieve their objectives because their impact investor just pulled out funding on them. And that's something that every other investor will see. So again, be careful with new fundraising, new incentive and funding methods, because they also have disincentives built into them. They can be right for you, but they have to be examined very carefully. I think factors for success are, there are so many that you have to be careful about. And one is getting organized, really getting organized with your company. When it comes time to invest, it seems to be that's never really the right time to try to find out where are all the documents that we've signed up till now. What do we have, and what should we have done that we haven't done yet? I want to go back for a second to the mission statement. Okay, it's very, very important when you're trying to be successful that you understood what your mission statement was, and that when you're presenting yourself with your investor, it's clear. It's clear on the mission statement is working in terms of the investor you're looking for, and obviously the other way around, that an investor is looking for a company that has the right mission, and not something that sounds good and sounds impactful and sounds like it can meet some good goals, but then on the way can get railroaded. One of the most important ways to protect yourself on both ends is to document the mission statement, meaning the purposes of the company, the purposes of the use of funds need to be aligned with the mission statement. What I wanted to emphasize is that for a company, you've got to get yourself really organized, because there's something called Exhibit A on a contract, which is some really important thing. It's going to be the services that are supposed to be given. It's going to be a price list. It's going to be minimum quantities that need to be delivered. And that somehow never gets done. And when it never gets done down the line, it turns out it's really important and nobody can find it, and it becomes quite a mess. So when you do a contract, also people are signing contracts on WhatsApp now. They're not even just scanning. So their page is missing. Nobody knows what the full contract is. These things are very important. Down the line, what are your rights? What do you have? So for any business, especially as we keep using new technology, it makes us much less organized than when we used to just print out things and have them. Make sure you have everything complete and you know where it all is. Make sure you can prove your IP is really yours. What do you do if your key employee leaves? Do you have anything showing what the key employee has been doing so that someone else can replace them? Another thing is you've got these long, boring 30-page articles of association, and it has really important rights in there that you have to understand. And they may not be drafted well enough to actually use them. Like if an investor wants to sell, then what happens? If an investor is going to sell, the investor, let's say, has to offer to other people in the company first, the other shareholders. Let's say none of them want to buy. The investor can then bring in somebody else. What if your new investor is not aligned with your mission? What if your new investor is much more focused on financial? Or your new investor is pushing so hard on the social returns that you're missing the business model that you were also trying to do for your own sustainability. All these things are important, that they're identified and you know how it works. The mechanics of these sections, they're long and complicated sometimes. And the mechanics very often do not work until, and when you try to use them, you find out. You really don't know how many days you have to answer. You really don't know what information you need to give. When it says 10 days notice, it doesn't say when the 10 days start or stop. All sorts of small points. We like to say that problems in the drafting, but it's important that for your company, whether you like it or not, you need to know what rights are given to your shareholders, what rights exist in the company, You need to read these articles of association and understand them. You don't understand them, get help. Make sure they're drafted in a way that you can use them. Another thing is the cap table. Formulas have to be correct. The cap table has to be right. Not everybody can do a cap table. You think that Excel is pretty common by now, but it's not. And still some people get it wrong. Again, important to see what's going on there and getting it right. So pay attention to things like, do you have a cap table which accurately reflects all the shares that have been issued and everything else? Options, are there convertible rights that need to be somehow mentioned there so that when someone looks at the cap table, they know really who are the owners, who actually has rights in this company. Okay. Next, we go on to a few other things. I talked about options before. Don't promise options to someone unless you are completely organized and your plan has been done correctly, registered with the income tax authorities of the state of Israel. Otherwise, the people who have gotten a promise of an option, you think, but I only promised them, I didn't give them anything yet. No, not good enough. You could be ruining their ability to get favorable tax treatment, so be careful. Innovation Authority has said also, you got it, there's some strings there. It matters how you want to use your technology later. There's a lot of developments which have made it much easier for licensing and transferring technology abroad at the time, but be careful how you use it, because sometimes it might make it harder for you to do things in the future that you want to do. You got to watch the use of university staff or hospital staff. Those can be government employees, and what they do can give their university or the hospital or the company that has them certain rights on your IP, on the inventions that they bring in. Another thing to be careful of, and I think on small companies especially, don't go crazy with the whole tax planning thing and we want a U.S. company. Everybody says we want a U.S. company. Yeah, but if you're sitting in Israel with your U.S. company, do you know that you're going to be taxed in Israel as an Israeli tax resident? Maybe that's not such a great idea. So that's the important one. I hope I gave you a flavor. I'm going to try to finish on time, even though we lost a little bit with my double speaking. That's a little bit of why the legal side to all these things we're trying to accomplish are so important for your structure and for the operation of your business. So we like to say using good lawyers certainly can be a help for you all. I think I will be available if you'd like for some questions, because I tried to go through this very, very quickly, especially the second time around when I was telling it. So if you'd like to join me in sessions for some questions and answers, I'd be happy to answer any questions you want.